So what are critique groups? I just started a very highly intensive critique group in the Author Conservatory, and since I'm kind of in that mindset right now, I thought it would be fun to talk about critique groups with you guys. So what is a critique group? A critique group is a group of writers that come together to discuss and offer in-depth feedback on one another's work. So that can be a group of 3 writers or 6 writers, and they're all just coming together and sharing one another's work. One reason that I find those to be super helpful is because all writers have different strengths. I'm sure that as you've written, that you've realized your strength and you've seen just what you're weak at. And everyone has weaknesses and everyone has strengths. So when you can get a group of writers together in a room and you can share those sort of things, it really helps to elevate your projects because there are going to be lots of different strengths in that place. So if you're having a group of 6 that are joined together, you're going to have some people that are really strong with characters, and some that are stronger with world building, some that are stronger with plot, some that are stronger with deep POV and diving into character voice. So to have a critique group and to get people together that are other writers that are like-minded, who are similar in your stage, can be so valuable as a writer, especially if you're beginning and you don't have the money to hire an editor and you're not quite there yet. So to get a critique group is so important and so helpful so that you can really get your manuscript up to the next level. So in the past, I've been in multiple different critique groups with different levels of intensity and different rules and different guidelines that we follow. I would say usually it's good to keep critique groups between like 3 and 6 people. When you get more than that, it just becomes overwhelming and there's just too many people to critique and help, and it just becomes kind of difficult to keep up with. So I feel like 3 to 6 people is the sweet spot with critique groups. And to have a critique group that is that small is really personal and intimate, and you can really get to know each other's stories in a really nice way. So how do you actually work inside of a critique group? Now, I am not a professional. I've not put these together for hundreds of people or anything. I've just been in a few. So I have experienced them and know what I like and what I don't enjoy. So I wanted to share with you a few little things about working in a critique group. So when you're starting your critique group, you're obviously going to decide how you do it. Some critique groups will say that you have blank amount of months to finish every single manuscript, and then you help each other through that, and then when it's over, you dissolve the critique group. End of story. Other critique groups work more with amount guidelines. So you can submit 1 chapter a week every week, and people that are available will help you with it, and then you're expected to help them with theirs when they submit theirs. And that's really nice, I find, because you can submit every week or every other week or just when you find time, and you're getting that consistent feedback without it being stressful, and it's just simple and easy. Sometimes people do it where it's like 1 chapter a week. Other times it's like a word count limit, so like 2,000 or 3,000 words a week, and that's what you can submit. In your critique group, that is a great place to start, with just talking to your friends and talking to the other writers and being like, hey, what are our guidelines? Are we doing 1 chapter a week? How many words is that? Because it is a good idea to say how many words it is, because I have friends that write like 10,000 word chapters, and I write like 1,500 to 2,000 word chapters. So it's good to clarify what you mean when you say a chapter. So that is just a simple starting discussion. One other thing I wanted to mention is I know a lot of people, especially young writers, they have their family and friends read it, and that's kind of their critique group, so to speak. But I'm sorry to say this, it's not a critique group. That is great to have reader feedback. Trust me, it is really phenomenal to get reader feedback and to see what they think, see what stood out to them, what they liked, what they didn't like, but it's not a critique group. So when you're looking to start a critique group, it's really important to find writers who are in a similar stage as you, and make sure that they're writers, because writers notice things that readers don't. And it's really good to get reader feedback. I can't stress that enough. Reader feedback is super important because readers notice things as they're just reading through a book like they would any other book. But to get writer feedback is also really important because writers notice things that are a little bit more in depth. So most readers aren't going to read your book and say, hey, I didn't think the character voice was really unique, or this character didn't feel like we were diving into their deep third quite enough. Obviously, some readers would probably notice that sort of stuff, but most of your readers are not going to think about that. They're going to think about big overall general general things or just random things that stand out to them. So it's really important to get a group of writers together because you want them to notice things that they would want you to notice about their book if they're trying to get it to the best that it can be. So let's get into specifics. We've established who you want in your critique group, the timeline and the guidelines that you want to use for your critique group, and things like that. So let's get into specifics of how to actually use your critique group. So I like to use Google Docs because I can track changes and I can see comments, and I find that to be really helpful so that you can see what people are commenting on, and then you can ask questions in the comments as well about things that you noticed without having to pass along huge documents every time you send it to your critique partner. But that's honestly just subjective. So whatever format works for you works really well. So when it comes down to actually giving feedback, one thing that's really important is giving feedback in love. So it's really important to put yourself in other people's shoes when you are giving critique so that you're not putting them down, but you're showing them how to make their work better, and you're coming alongside them and helping them and encouraging them through it. Putting your critique in encouragement is super helpful to just smooth the process along and just to not hurt anyone's feelings. Obviously, as a writer, you kind of have to develop a tough skin because you're going to get a lot of rejections and a lot of poor feedback because you're not perfect and your story has to grow if you ever want it to get to the best that it can be, and you have to be willing to let go. But at the same time, you want to be kind and encouraging in your feedback. I always find that a really good way to do that is just to share solutions. And I often like to do that in question forms. That is a really great way to help them come up with solutions and help them brainstorm without just bluntly saying, hey, this did not work. Though there is a time and place for that, okay? Let me be honest. There is a time and place for saying this did not work, but you also want to say, how about this? This is an idea I have to do this. So presenting your ideas as questions and letting them think about it and brainstorm it really helps. And in critique groups, it's not always about this didn't work and all this big drama. It can be smaller things like, hey, what if you tried this word here, or try something different, or this phrasing didn't quite fit. So what are some things that you should be thinking about while you're critiquing? I know we just talked about how to work inside of a critique group and how to point things out in a kind and encouraging manner so that you're not pulling people down, but how do we actually go about critiquing people? So when you're inside the critique group, these are some things that you want to be thinking about as you're reading your peers' work. So characters are very versatile. I'm not only talking about a character named Jane and what she looks like and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about dialogue, description, how they're interacting with their environment. Are you seeing them interact with their environment? Are they engaging the five senses in their environment? Are you able to visualize the character? Or if you're not, is there a reason the author didn't want you to visualize the character? Things like that to help you dive into that and to help you strengthen your critique partner and get their story to the best that it can be, because to mention that and find those problems and find those holes that maybe they're missing, because every author misses things, especially in first drafts and second drafts. So to be able to help them grow their characters and strengthen them really will help them bring their story a lot stronger. And characters are what people get behind in stories. Like, plots are awesome, but it's the characters that people really get attached to. That also goes into things like deep third. Are we picking up deep third? If they're trying to have us be in deep third, are we picking that up? Are they using unique character voices, or do every single character sound the same? If they're popping between different POVs, are you able to tell the difference between characters and whose head we're in before they say, oh, we're in Jane's head? Because to help them do that will really strengthen their plot and stories. And then, is the plot interesting? So yes, characters do drive the plot, and characters are super important, and getting good characters is super important to any story. But plot is also important. If there's no plot, no one cares about the character. So is their plot interesting? Are you picking up on tension? Does each chapter have rising stakes? Because if chapters are just boring, maybe we need to talk about cutting them. And if you're having lots of people in your critique group mention, hey, I really don't feel like this chapter meant much. There's no character growth, no character development, no rising stakes, no risk of loss, nothing's happening. Maybe you should consider cutting it. Then that is a sign that maybe you should cut it. So it's really important to listen to your critique partners. If they're bringing something up, especially if there's more than one of them bringing something up, then that might be a sign that, oh, hey, they're all picking up on this thing. So listening to your critique partners and your critique group in that is super important. And they should be looking for things like, is the plot actually interesting? Obviously, it's not their job to rewrite the story, and it's not their job to tell you what to do in the story because they're not the writer. But as a critique group partner, you really want to be looking for those things to make sure that the plot is as tight and as strong as it can be. And then we have things like world building, and this isn't only for fantasy and sci-fi. Okay, I write historical fiction and there is world building involved because I'm not making up my own world, but I have to fit into the confines of the world that it was. And that is really important. And so if you're writing historical fiction, I really like the idea of having historical fiction critique partners because they have a brain wired for historical fiction. And if you're a fantasy writer or a sci-fi writer, get those type of people around you because you guys have crazy brains and you can come up with really amazing things that I don't think of because my brain is not wired that way and I don't write stories like that. So it's really good to get those type of writers around you and you can come up with ideas together. So when you're in your critique group and you're critiquing each other's work, look for things like world building. Is the world standing out? Are you seeing the world while you're reading it? Are you using the five senses? Often when we're writing, we only use things that we see. So the grass was green, the sky was blue. Okay, that's really lame. But we want to use things like the wind swished through her skirts. The air smelled like freshly baked bread as she was walking up the gravel road to her house. She stubbed her toe. I don't know, I'm making this up. But you want to engage more of the senses. So often we find ourselves always just using what we see. But we need to be engaging the five senses. And that's something that critique group partners can really help you with because they notice things that you don't always notice. And so they might notice that, hey, you've been using the same action tag for the last 10 pages. Can we not talk about her jaw tightening anymore? And that can apply to world building and to characters and to plot. Just using the five senses is super important, and critique group partners can really, really help you with that. And then the last one that is super important to remember is encouragement. So if there are things that you really like as you're reading, point them out. As I've gone through my docs and read through comments, my favorite ones that make me smile are the ones where they're just excited about my story and they're just giving reactions because they're excited. And those always make me excited because I feel like they're connecting with my story. So if you're excited about a part of the story, tell them. You can never give too much encouragement. And then I have just a little bit left. I want to talk a tiny bit about when you're the person getting the feedback. So we just talked a lot about you being the person critiquing and things to look for when you're critiquing other people's work. But what if you are the person that is being critiqued? When people give comments that are feedback, you don't always have to take their solutions. Sometimes when people give solutions, they just don't fit with your story, and you are the author and you know the heart of your story more than anyone else does. So you don't always have to take their solution, but you do need to think behind the heart of the solution and see what that is, because usually if they're telling you that there's a problem somewhere, there probably is. You might not have to take the solution, but see the heart behind the problem so that you can fix it and brainstorm it. And my next point comes through that is, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. And if they suggested something and gave you an idea for how you could fix this problem, they are probably just fine if you come back and say, hey, I didn't love this solution, but I have this other idea. What do you think? And you can start a discussion. And remember, when you are the one being critiqued, it's really easy to take things personal, but it's not. It's not personal. As writers, your story gets really close to you and you hold on to it really tight and you love it. But it's just a story. So don't take things personally when you do get a comment or some feedback that is a little bit harder, because if you do want your story to grow, you're going to have to embrace some of the hard changes that people are going to suggest. And that's just the life of being a writer. So don't be afraid of their criticism, because that's the point of a critique group. Your goal is to get feedback, to get critique, to get a bit of criticism and a bit of help. And obviously you want encouragement sprinkled in there, but your goal is to make it better. And you're not going to be able to make your book better if all people say is, wow, I love it, it's amazing. And that's what I love about critique groups, that you're able to do that with a group of writers that have your best in mind, and you're able to exchange your strengths and just make your stories that much better. So if you are actually in a critique group right now, write in the comment what your favorite part of being in a critique group is. I'd love to hear what your experiences are and what you enjoy and what you don't like, or just have a chat about what your experiences have been with the critique groups. And if you've enjoyed this video and want to see more content and follow along on my writing journey and some tips and tricks that I will be sharing along the way, then please consider subscribing and following along. Well, this is the end of this week's video. I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again next week. Whereas it feels less attackive. Attackive is so not a word. To hear your thoughts in that. It's less not attactive. Will really strengthen their plot and stories, and my foot is totally asleep. Attackive is not a word.